It's like every time you open your phone, your portfolio looks like it got hit by a freight train. And listen, I get it. People want relief. They want green candles. They want the moon tweet. They want somebody to tell them it's happening tomorrow. But I'm going to tell you something right now, and you need to hear it. You need to pay attention. If you're still living, day to day on price action, if you're still letting random dips mess with all your emotions and everything, and you keep on stressing and, refreshing your portfolio and, really just emotionally not there, if you're still treating XRP like it's some lottery ticket, you're thinking like a tourist, not like an investor, not like an institution, not like someone who understands history. Because what's happening right now is not about today's candle. It's not about the weekly chart. It's about timelines. A BIS insider just confirmed something on camera that most people completely missed. The timeline is locked in. And if you hold XRP, this is a must see. Today, we're not doing hopium. We're not doing fantasy predictions. We're not doing trust me, bro. We're doing something way more powerful. We're following the trail of institutional signals, because when retail gets excited, they scream on Twitter. But when the system moves, it whispers, it documents, it files, and it coordinates. And the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, isn't some random group on the internet. They are the central bank of central banks. So when somebody from that world goes on camera and starts talking about frameworks, timelines, and global implementation, that's not concept. That is a blueprint. And once you understand what they're building, you'll realize why XRP holders aren't early anymore. They are positioned now. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you live in a city from the early 1900s and the roads are dirt, horse carriages, no traffic lights, no highways. And then one day the government, quietly starts, building massive underground infrastructure, pipes, sewers, electrical grids. Nobody celebrates it. There's no parade, no fireworks in the city, but that infrastructure, it changes everything. Suddenly, skyscrapers become possible, industries explode, commerce scales, and a new era begins. That's where we are right now, but in finance. People think we're watching, crypto charts. No, no, no. Guys, ladies and gentlemen, pay attention. We're watching the world upgrade from a system built for, fax machines to a system built for instant settlement. Because the truth is, the financial system today is still moving value like it's 1975. Slow, fragmented, expensive, full of friction. And the BIS, they've been working behind the scenes to standardize and coordinate a global transition, not just to, hype crypto and, basically hype it all on social media saying, oh, everything's going to the moon, but instead to really make sure the world doesn't break when the upgrade happens. Now, here's the part, most people gloss over. When BIS executives speak publicly, they don't talk like influencers. They don't say, oh, guys, buy this coin, get rich. No, they speak in the language of the machine. They say things like, minimum standards, implementation, consistent global adoption, coordination, frameworks. And that's important because those words don't exist for entertainment. Those words exist because the machine is getting ready to operate at scale. And when someone from BIS goes on camera and basically tells you, look, we're setting the standards, we're making sure they're implemented globally, and we're coordinating because this space changes rapidly, that is a gigantic signal right there. It's them saying, we're not asking if digital assets will exist in the new system, we are deciding how. And once the standards are locked, the rollout becomes mechanical, like dominoes. You don't argue with dominoes, you don't negotiate with dominoes. Once the first one tips, everything else follows. This is where people lose the plot. Retail thinks revolutions happen loud. They think the moment is a headline. Breaking, finance upgraded. No, no, no. The real revolutions are quiet until it's too late. The internet didn't become the internet when you first saw a website. It became the internet when fiber was laid under oceans, when protocols standardized, when the infrastructure was built. Amazon wasn't Amazon when people laughed at it selling books. Amazon became Amazon when it built warehouses, logistics, payments, cloud infrastructure, the boring stuff, the stuff nobody cares about. And that's the part that makes your jaw drop with XRP, because while everyone else was screaming about memes, Ripple was doing the boring stuff: compliance, legal pathways, licenses, bank relationships, infrastructure, the things institutions require, because institutions don't move on hype, they move on predictability. Let's talk about predictability for a second. This is where most people expose themselves. They hear escrow and they panic. They think, why does Ripple control supply? Isn't that centralized? And it's like, my brother, do you know how the real world works? Institutions do not adapt assets that behave on, like wild animals. They adopt systems that behave like infrastructure. A bridge doesn't randomly change shape on Tuesday. A power grid doesn't decide it's emotional today. Predictability is what allows scale. And in global finance, predictability is everything because when you're moving billions of dollars across borders, you don't want surprises. Ripple's structure isn't, random. It's strategic. It's engineered to create stability and confidence in a world that requires structure. And the BIS timeline being, locked in, that's basically confirming the era of experimentation is ending and the era of implementation is beginning. Let me paint a picture for you. Think of the BIS like the engineers designing the blueprint for an airport. They're not talking about, which airline is the coolest. They're talking about runways, security protocols, air traffic control, safety standards, coordination across borders. Because if every, country builds airports differently, things will start to crash. Now apply that logic to digital assets. If one country regulates one way and another does something completely different, the system breaks, it crashes. So BIS is doing the unsexy work, if you want to call it that. Global minimum standards, consistent implementation, cooperation across jurisdictions. And when that gets locked in, what else happens next? Mass adoption becomes possible, not because everyone believes in crypto like it's just some genie, but because the financial machine now has rails it can legally and safely operate on. That is the switch right there. Not a celebrity tweet, not anything magic. The picture this. You ever walk into a museum and see like ancient tools, old hammers, like old navigation maps, old machinery, and you're thinking to yourself, like, how do people function with this? That's not like what the current payment system is looking like in 10 years. Nostalgic. And what's crazy is all of this correlates to just one thing. People will still be arguing about the price could ever, you could have bought XRP at, at 50 cents or $3 or $5, whatever the case may be, while the system is already, using the rails. Because the next era isn't just about crypto. It's about instant settlement, tokenization, liquidity efficiency. The old world is like sending value through a maze, and the new world is like a straight line highway. And the BIS is basically telling you that highway is being built on schedule. Now, I'm going to say something that makes people emotional. Bitcoin is legendary. It proved digital, scarcity. It changed history. But the problem is with Bitcoin is, some people treat Bitcoin like it's the answer to everything. And the system doesn't work like that. It's just that simple. You can't run modern, global finance on a concept. You run it on infrastructure. Bitcoin is like, gold in a vault, store value narrative. Okay, cool. But, XRP on the other hand, XRP is designed like a bridge, like plumbing, like rails. It's designed for motion. And the future of finance isn't just about, storing value. It's about moving value instantly. That's why institutions care so much about the systems like Ripple's framework. And, they're not trying to join a community. They're trying to upgrade the engine of global commerce. So what does it mean when a BIS insider confirms the timeline it's locked? It means the planning phase is maturing into an execution phase. It means the global machine is not backing down. It means they're coordinating and standardizing to remove risk, because the last thing the BIS wants is chaos. They want controlled modernization. They want a future where you can look at it where like cross-border payments are instant, settlement is efficient, liquidity is optimized, and risk is managed. And the scary part for people, who are asleep, this happens with or without their permission. It doesn't matter, because the world doesn't wait for retail to feel ready. That's why insiders always win. They don't trade narratives. They implement frameworks. So let's bring all of it home right now. People think the domino effect begins when price explodes. Wrong. Completely wrong. Incorrect. It begins when the domino first tips, and you don't see it at first. You hear it, a quiet confirmation, a timeline statement, a standard being implemented, a framework network being coordinated globally, that's the first domino. And right now, that domino is already moving. So if you're holding XRP, you're not holding a meme, you're holding a potential piece of infrastructure in a system upgrade. And history rewards the people who already see the future early, not the people who wait for permission. So here's my message to you: stop letting red candles scare you.